So I'm Mackenzie, and today I'm going to be doing some Zentangle with you. I'm going to wait a few minutes while people get on, and then we'll get started. Alright, hi. So again, I'm Mackenzie. I work mostly behind the scenes at HIR Wellness Institute, and today we're going to be doing some Zentangle. So I'm going to figure out how to turn my camera around. So today we're going to be doing 3 different types. You can't turn your phone while recording. Beautiful. Okay. So today we're going to be doing 3 different types of Zentangling. Hey Claudia. So I understand that we do have some people who have done Zentangling before. I'm just going to do these 3 basic ones. Just as a way of like introducing Zentangle and to help people find what they really like to do. For me, I like repetitive motion because Zentangle is what I use to help me calm down and usually to process information. So you'll find me Zentangling in meetings and things like that while I take in lots of information and figure out how I want to organize it. This is definitely one of my favorites, the swirls. So we're going to start there. So the first thing I want you to do is to find some paper. And then I have a couple of things that I have with me today. So I have a pencil, a pen, a Sharpie, and then an eraser. And then I'd like you to find a random object. Like I've got a glass nearby that's not wet, so I don't wet up my paper. Or I've got my remote, just something smallish or with a small circumference that you can use as a stencil as we go forward. So I'm going to use this remote here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some areas that I can Zentangle in. You can Zentangle freehand, so you can like draw pictures using Zentangle Art. But I find when we're practicing things for the first time, having a small space where you can practice that in is usually a little bit better. Just so that you can get used to what it's like before you have the pressure of trying to fill up an entire page. So I'm just loosely going around this object here to create a shape. And then I'm going to overlap them. And you can do it any way you want. I just like angles to create those odd lines. Because again, Zentangle fills up an entire space for me. So creating those odd lines can make little tricksy corners that you can work into, and it just allows you to, kind of explore the shapes. Alright, so now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas where I can Zentangle in, and I'm just going to add in one more here. Alright, I take it back. I'm going to add one more. Just to make it look interesting, because usually you want to get these all done before you start. Alright, so this gives me a lot of different spaces that I can use to put my designs into. Alright, so of course my phone stand broke before I started this, so I'm just going to angle my camera like this, and if you guys have any trouble seeing, let me know. Alright, again, that first design that I'm going to start with is the swirl design. And for some reason, my music stopped. That's odd. Alright. So now what I'm going to do here is to get started. I'm just going to make a single swirl. And the goal here for me, and you can do what feels right for you, but the goal here for me is to try and make sure that these black lines don't touch each other and to keep a relatively consistent space between them. Alright? So as I go into my next one here, I'm just going to position it right next to the first one, and I'm going to make that swirl, and all I'm trying to do is be consistent about my lines. Now you'll see here that I kind of bumped into the edge of this other swirl and then also hit the line. At this point I lift up my pen, and my mind likes to follow the stroke, so I just continue following the stroke until I hit that line again. At which point I pick up my pen and I just continue with the stroke until I feel it's done. And you can keep, going and twirling that out as far as you want. But I feel that once you finish this, it becomes a little bit more unrealistic to continue that swirl, so I'll start a new one. Alright. Then you'll just keep going on, continuing with that swirl pattern. And this is where one of those corners comes in, and I find these are a lot of fun just because they make your shape change a little bit. And sometimes they provide you with little areas where you can add in little itty bitty tiny swirls. Alright, so now that I've finished up with this section here, I'm going to go on and try the second one in the middle, kind of that psychedelic checkerboard. For this one, I do recommend that for your first time you choose a relatively small area, just because it's a little ink heavy and it can get pretty difficult to keep up with. And we're actually going to switch from our regular pen over to a pencil to start with. So I am going to choose to do this section right here. And the trick for this one is that here you can kind of see that going up and down for the most part, I kind of followed a single pattern to keep that flow going before you change it up with the opposite portion. Alright, so for this up and down portion, we're just going to follow a general pattern that looks roughly the same. You can create a sunset effect or have wider gaps, but for the most part, you want to keep this relatively uniform. Alright, so after you have these done, then we get to make it a little bit more interesting by creating that odd pattern that doesn't have to be as uniform as the first one does. So I'm going to create the center line first, and that'll kind of be what I follow. So what I did here, and I just have to mentally keep track of what I did, is I created that curve. Now I'm going to follow it up here. One more. And then down below, I'm going to start with a very small section and kind of end with something bigger. And onwards we go. So as you look at these squares, you might notice that some are very large in comparison to others, and you can always add in additional lines to help out with that. So I'm just going to go in here and add a bit of a midpoint so that they're not quite so large as this one is. This one's got an odd shape to it, so it's a little bit harder to add in another line. And the reason that we start this one with pencil is just because if you tried to do these with pen, you would end up with something that wouldn't look as clean cut as this. There would be more rounded corners in it. So by starting with pencil, we can fill in these areas and then go back and erase them a day or two later. Thank you, Malia. What if you made a mistake in pen? There is no mistakes in Zentangle. See, if we look back here, because why not? You see here that I did all this really cool pattern, right? But down here, I ended up filling in all of these blocks. But you didn't notice that before I pointed it out, right? So there's no mistakes in Zentangle. Alright, so coming back to this one here, I'm just going to choose a random square to start with. And the important part is that wherever you choose to start with, you kind of have to keep going from that center point. It's really easy to end up accidentally filling in the wrong square like I did up here. Just because you might start over here and then work your way around and then flip over to the other side, and when you start meeting in the middle, you end up making little mistakes like that. So just a lot easier if you keep to the same area. Alright, so now that I finished my first square here, my next options are down here, right here, here, and here. You can also do the row if you'd like, and you can always X these out so that you know which ones you should be coloring in and which ones you shouldn't. Do I Zentangle often? Yes, especially when I'm really stressed out. And it really depends on what I'm doing in life. If I'm learning, I tend to Zentangle so I can process information better. If I'm stressed out, I Zentangle to relieve a lot of that stress. And if I'm inspired, sometimes I'll Zentangle, or bored. So I have a lot of practice doing it, but most of my Zentangle isn't so much like super creative montages of designs as just like corners that are filled with swirls. And that's definitely something to look at when you're Zentangling, is that this is meant to be, you know, a mindful, relaxing exercise. So what is it that kind of helps you relax? You have to be aware of your body. Like, is your hand uncomfortable? Are you at the right angle? Do you like this design? Is your pen something that is bothering you? Is there not enough flow? Is it the wrong color? You know, I like doing most of my Zentangle in black and white, but you can find pens in pretty much any color. You can do this in marker if you want to make big designs. You can do this with micro pens. Up here I do have a couple of different pens like jotted down. So these are the 3 I'm using today. But I do have like finer pens that create these super tiny lines so that you can make super detailed work. That's just not something that I really like doing, so I don't do it. But as you explore what you like in Zentangling, you might find that, you know, you do like the highly detailed work, or you prefer painting while Zentangling. I've done a couple of those before, and it wasn't my thing, but it was a really cool result. So when you're coloring in these sections, especially the bigger ones, it can be helpful to kind of break them up. And I like doing them with different types of lines. That way I don't create too much of like a coloring pattern. It's also why I prefer using a heavy ink flow pen, just so that if I do have to do ink sections like this, you don't see as much of the line work that goes into it. Or the coloring, I guess. Putting in these half lines can also be like super motivating because you're just like, I'm so close to the finish line. Just a little bit more. And it can help you keep you motivated until you finish up that square. Because I do find these really daunting. It doesn't look like a lot, but when you're in there just draining ink onto the paper, it feels like a lot. Alright, so I finished up my second Zentangle design. If you're not finished, no worries. You can take it at your own pace or follow along for the next one. And you can always review this video later. It is going to be posted to our page. So for this one, you're going to want to start with a pencil. I like using mechanical pencils. And then a straight edge. I do have like this giant ruler, but it's made of metal and it hisses every time I touch it. So I'm just going to use a piece of paper instead. And this third one that we're going to be doing is, I don't even know what to call this. It's like an alternating line pattern. And to start with that, we're going to make a grid. Alright. So I'm going to use this one here. So I'll turn my thing here. So I'm going to use this one here. And the way I'm going to start is with just one line. And again, that's with my pencil. And you want to get these as even as possible. So I'm going to do, I think, a little over 1/4 inch apart lines. If you do have a ruler, this makes it a lot easier. Alright, so coming in from below. Alright, so that's my first set of lines. And then my second set of lines. So these I do want to be at kind of 90-degree angles if I can. So I'm just going to line up my paper with one of these lines. And kind of make a first mark here. Just so I can follow that. And then I want to keep about the same space, so about 1/4 inch here. I'm gonna move to the other side. And you can see here that these aren't perfect squares. That's okay. Okay. So again, these are kind of big sections. You can always make smaller sections or larger sections depending on what you're doing. This one would be a really great one to do on like a poster board. If you wanted to make like inch-wide sections, you could do a whole poster board with this. But I like doing the small stuff because it just feels more comfortable for me. So again, you're just going to start somewhere. I'm going to start again here in the middle, and I'm just going to do 3 lines. When you're doing this freehand without the lines, it's usually easier to alternate the number of lines you have. So you might have 3 going up and down, and then 4 going opposite, and following that pattern just so that you fill out the space better. But when you're in a grid, it's usually pretty easy to try and space them out. And again, you just want to be consistent. Doesn't matter if the line is, touching or if they're a little scrunched up. All you want to do is be consistent because that's what's going to make the nice pattern. So this one goes by pretty quick. And once you end up getting into a blank space like this, you can always go back up and follow with what you see. Keep you in line. This is another one that, just like the checkerboards over here, you definitely want to make sure that you stay in one place and work your way out, just so that you don't end up accidentally running into or making a mistake. I do that all the time, and it's not really a mistake. It takes a little bit more effort to figure out how to go from there. I do try and fill in these little lines here because the pencil is going to get erased. So if there's nothing there, it's going to look a little bit awkward. Alright, so those are our first 3 patterns for the day. After you've erased, can you still add more in? If you're talking about like in a different area, definitely. I wouldn't recommend putting it in any of the adjacent ones. Like for example, I would love to do another swirl. So I wouldn't put my swirls here, 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 here. But I could put a whole nother section of swirls over here, which is what I'd fully intend to do. And for those who have finished up with their checkerboard pattern and then the 3 alternating lines, I would recommend waiting a day if you're using like a high flow pen like this before you erase them. Just because this is a water-based pen, if I went in and I erased all these lines right now, I might end up like smushing up the lines. So if you wait a day or so, then it really lets it dry and then you can erase them. If you're using like an alcohol-based marker, like one of these, then you should be able to erase them as soon as the ink appears dry. But that's where you can get this kind of faded effect. This third one here, I did use an alcohol marker on. So you can see that it's not quite as bright as the checkerboards. And that's just because the alcohol marker, you know, it doesn't dry as bright. So when I went in to erase those lines, it just took off the rest of that top layer of shine. It's really just a preference thing. If you like erasing them straight away, if you like this matte look, go right ahead, use alcohol markers. I just really like this, you know, high ink flow water-based pen. So that's my preference. But yeah, I'm going to go in and I'm going to fill this section with swirls. And while I'm doing that, I do want to ask, of these 3 that we did today, which one was your favorite? Or do you have multiple favorites? Have you done these before? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen any Zentangle patterns that you really liked the look of but didn't know how to do? If you do, go ahead and let me know in the comments and I'll see if we can do them next week. Alright, as we finish up, I would like to let you know that we do have a cares line through HIR Wellness. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed or sad or just need someone to talk to, always feel free to call the HIR Wellness cares line. And I think in the comments, they might not be there right now, but there is a survey. If you could take some time to go ahead and look at that, we would greatly appreciate it. Should only take just a couple of minutes, but all opinions matter. They always help us. And I want to thank you for joining me today doing Zentangle. We will be back again next Friday at 4 p.m. where we'll do some new Zentangle patterns, and we'll probably continue doing it on this drawing. If you want to fill yours up over the week, that's okay. We can always make a new one at the beginning of next session. Absolutely no trouble at all. Alright, so I'm all finished up there. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'll be here again next Friday at 4 p.m. Always feel free to check out our page. We have a lot of live videos going on every day of the week. I think our next one is with Malia again tonight at 8. So thank you very much, and I'll see you